Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how you manage to switch gears when your priorities change, like going from focusing on work to spending time with family well? A new study might shed some light on how our brains do that and how it affects our decisions. Imagine trying to play a video game where the rules and what earns you points keeps changing without telling you. Sounds tough, right? Well, in real life, we constantly face similar challenges. We have multiple goals juggling work, relationships, personal projects, and our priorities shift all the time. Think about deciding what to eat for lunch when you want to be healthy, but also crave something delicious. The big question researchers wanted to answer is, how do our brains learn to handle these constantly changing goals and preferences, especially when we aren't explicitly told how things have changed? Most of the time when scientists study learning, they look at situations where there is just one goal, like in a game you just want to win. But in real life, it is way more complicated. We're dealing with things that have multiple parts, and what is important can change. So, how do we learn to adjust when our game rules change without a clear announcement? This is where the researchers got really interested. They noticed that while lots of research looks at what goal we choose or how we keep a goal in mind, not much looks at how the very way we represent value influences how well we learn when things shift. They proposed two main ways our brains might do this. One way is like having separate mental filing cabinets for each aspect of a choice. If you are choosing a car, one cabinet might hold info about fuel efficiency, another about safety, and another about how stylish it looks. When your goal shifts, say from saving money to needing more space, you can just pull out the relevant info from the right cabinet and only adjust how much importance you give to each feature. This is like reweighting. The other way is like having just one big filing cabinet where everything is mashed together. Now, if your priorities change, you don't have the specific pieces of information anymore. You have to basically throw out what you had and start learning from scratch based on new feedback. This is relearning. To test this, they designed a clever experiment. Think of it like a wine trading game. Participants had to choose between 4 different wine producers. Each producer made both red and white wine. But on any given trial, only one type of wine was actually selling. The tricky part, they didn't know which wine was selling until after they made a choice and saw how much money they made. The market would switch between red and white wines without warning, staying on one type for about 10 to 20 trials before switching to the other without any explicit signal. So on each turn, you pick a producer, say you are confident about it, then you see how much red and white wine they made. But only one of those numbers actually counts towards your earnings, depending on which wine is currently in demand. Because the demand switched covertly, people had to figure out from the rewards which wine was selling and adjust their choices. The producers themselves were consistent. Some were great at making red but not white, others the opposite, and some were in the middle. This setup made it so that the relationship between a producer and its output was stable, but the goal, or which output mattered, was hidden. And what they found was that people got better at this over time. They learned to ditch the producer that used to be good when the market switched and start picking the one that was suddenly the best option. This shows that people are adapting to these hidden changes. Now, this is where the real science comes in. They used computer models to understand what was going on inside people's heads. They had 2 main models. The first, the single Q model, represented each producer with just one overall value, like a single score. When the market switched, this score became outdated, and the model had to learn a new score from scratch. The second model, the multi-Q model, was a bit more sophisticated. It kept separate scores for the red wine production from each producer and separate scores for the white wine production. When the market switched, this model didn't have to relearn everything. It could just adjust how much importance it gave to the red wine score versus the white wine score. And the results were quite striking. When they compared these models to how actual people behaved, they found that both models could explain some of the choices. But the multi-Q model, the one with separate feature values, explain people's behavior a little bit better overall. More importantly, by looking at a measure called the Switch Advantage Index, which basically measures how quickly people adjusted after a goal switch, they found a clear link. People whose behavior was better explained by the multi-Q model showed a much bigger advantage after a switch. This means that people who seem to be using separate value representations for red and white wine were much better and faster at adapting to the changing market, compared to those who seemed to be using a single integrated value. It was like they had a built-in flexibility. To make sure these findings weren't just a fluke of the first experiment, they did a second one. This time, both red and white wine always contributed to the reward, but their importance could change depending on the country the wine was being sold in. So instead of just one goal being active at a time, it was more like 2 goals were active. but their relative importance shifted. Think of it like this. In one country, red wine might be super valuable and white wine less so. In another country, it could be the other way around, or a balanced value for both. The producer's output stayed the same, but the country's preference changed. Participants again had to figure out these hidden preferences. And again, they found similar results. Scrolla, model comparison across participants based on Beacon 97's, centered the multi-Q model, which could track values for both red and white wine production separately. Still fit people's behavior better, especially when it came to adapting to the new country contexts after a switch. Scroll, post-switch performance increases with model evidence for multi-Q quantified as peak center participants, who behaved more like the multi-Q model were quicker to adapt to the new pricing in each country. This suggests that having separate value representations for different aspects of a choice truly helps us be more flexible when goals or their importance change. Scrolled, switch-locked behavior following a median split based on best-fitting model bike. Center, it is like our brains are more efficient when they can break down complex information and then recombine it as needed, rather than having to relearn everything every time. Scroll confidence during goal arbitration center, the researchers also looked at how confident people felt. They found that right after a goal switch, people felt a lot less confident, which makes sense. But here is the really interesting part. The people who were better explained by the multi-Q model, the flexible ones, recovered their confidence faster. Scroll reported confidence, normalized within participant to 0, 1 aligned to the context switch, and split by median Bixi center. This suggests that confidence isn't just a feeling. It might be a kind of internal monitoring system that tells us when our current understanding of the world isn't quite right, and when we've successfully readjusted to new circumstances. If you are using that more flexible, feature-based representation, you might feel more confident about your adjustments because you are not starting from 0. Scroll discussion center. So, what does all this mean? The big takeaway is that how we represent value in our brains really shapes how well we adapt to changing goals. Having separate representations for different features of an outcome allows us to reweight our priorities instead of having to relearn everything from scratch. This is key to behavioral flexibility. Scroll for data indicate that behavioral flexibility depends on how learned values are represented and recombined at the time of choice. Center, think of it like this. If you know how to bake cookies using flour, sugar, and eggs, and then you need to make a cake, you don't forget how to use flour, sugar, and eggs. You just adjust the proportions and maybe add other ingredients. That is reweighting. If you completely forgot what flour was and had to look it up again, that is relearning, and it would take much longer. Scroll multi-Q learners were able to reuse previously learned feature. Specific values when contextual weights changed, adjusting behavior primarily through reweighting rather than relearning. Center, this also has implications for artificial intelligence. Many AI systems are trained for one specific task and struggle when the rules change. This research shows how building AI with more modular, feature-based value representations could make them more adaptable, just like humans. It could help them avoid catastrophic forgetting, where they completely erase old knowledge when learning something new. Scroll limitations see center now. It is important to remember that this is still research. In experiment 2, for example, people were learning both the feature values and how much those features mattered. Future studies could try to isolate just the reweighting part to see that advantage even more clearly. Also, the experiments look at a limited number of features and contexts. Real life is a lot more complex. Scrolling conclusion, our work identifies 2 alternative ways in which the structure of value representation during learning shapes behavior and confidence at goal switches. Center, but the core message is powerful. The way our brains organize value information directly impacts our ability to navigate a world where goals and priorities are always in flux. It highlights a fundamental principle of cognitive flexibility. It is not just about learning, but about how we learn and represent what we've learned. Scroll beyond cognition. These findings inform the design of more adaptive AI. Center, this study gives us a fascinating peek into the hidden machinery of our minds that allows us to be so adaptable. It suggests that our ability to manage multiple, shifting goals isn't magic, but a sophisticated process of representation and reweighting. What do you guys think? Does this resonate with your own experiences of switching between tasks or priorities? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this episode insightful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more brainy breakdowns, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching and stay curious.